Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to see you today.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
I'm doing very well. Let's talk about foreign policy a little bit.
Idea.
We do that on occasion. Last week, we had a program we called A Little Bit of Good News, and we thought things were improving a little bit because Trump had a summit with Putin, even though the neocons went nuts. It was good, and then Putin was invited back, to the White House, which we thought was very good news.
Start, yeah.
But it's a good thing we said a little bit of good news, because the next day it looks like the neocons had the upper hand and it got canceled. But today, another little bit of good news, at least moving in the right directions. Hopefully it'll turn out to be something of value. And that has to do with a meeting last week at Doha in Qatar. And, the Taliban met with American State Department officials. They're talking about peace, backing off and maybe ending the war or something like that. Who knows? They didn't come up with a peace treaty or anything like that, but they both, I think they're both exhausted. The war's in, sometimes exhausted. After 17 years, I don't know why the American people didn't get exhausted a long time ago. And the taxpayers should have been exhausted if they knew what was happening. But this also coincides with a report that came out that our friend Walter Jones and others asked for, and to try to find out how much it's costing to be over there. And they looked into waste and fraud, which I find a little ironic. I think all money in not only is a waste and a fraud when we fight these wars, there's actually a negative on it because it creates a bad situation. But the report came back and said that in the last 7 years we've wasted and fraudulently lost over $15 billion in the last 11 years. That isn't the whole time of the war. I mean, it's many, many times that amount that has been lost. So that came out, shows how bad it is. We're having a little bit of talk. Maybe this good war that Obama liked, maybe it'll end. And hopefully it'll end with less humiliation than what happened in Vietnam. But I don't know. When you do things that are rather ridiculous and harmful, a little bit of humiliation isn't the worst thing in the world. But right now, the talks have occurred, and they're going to talk again. And maybe that will be phased out, less troops being sent. I imagine it's close to 15,000 troops that we have over there now, and costing a lot of money. So it's about time they started talking about it. Let's hope this is a little bit of good news that turns out to be much better news when we just pack our bags and leave.
Yeah, the talks were pretty fascinating, actually, because it's among the first time that the Taliban has actually allowed it to get out into the media that they met with the U.S. And I think that might be because they feel confident. It's kind of a PR move. This is something I found remarkable about the meeting. The Taliban told the State Department, okay, we'll sit down and talk with you, but that Afghan government, the one that you're sponsoring, is not invited. And the U.S. said, okay, no problem. So you wonder if they're looking to throw the elected government, so-called elected government, under the bus. They see the writing on the wall. The Taliban is increasing its influence every year. It controls now half the country, and essentially the other half you could call contested, except for Kabul. But it's very interesting to see that these talks are starting at this point where we had the surge. McMaster and Mattis told Trump, I know your instinct is you want to pull out. You can't do that. We got to keep doing the same thing we've been doing. We'll have success this time. Well, we're quietly backing off of that as well.
This is not exactly a peace treaty, and they admit that. It's sort of a fancy ceasefire, because we're not on the verge of saying, well, we're leaving. We're going to be around, and we need a couple bases there, and we want to have a presence. They're still probably thinking about gas pipelines and other things. But the Taliban would be given a reprieve that they could move and secure their efforts in some of the places where we've been constantly bombing them. Maybe the bombing will start. So it definitely is a move in the right direction, a long way from a peace treaty, and it's a long way from the American people knowing exactly what has gone on there in the past 17 years. And, it's still a risky area. Pakistan is still there, and they've had a new election, and that raises some questions too, because there's been sympathy in Pakistan for the Taliban, and it was really that coalition that helped helped get rid of the government, after 9/11.
Well, in the first days of the U.S. attack on Afghanistan, a lot of the Taliban just went and cooled their heels. They went into Pakistan and just kind of hid them on the mountains. But you're right, they did have a new election. Imran Khan was newly elected in Pakistan. He's an interesting guy. He comes from a very wealthy family. He's educated at Oxford. He's considered a populist. In 2012, he was on the Julian Assange show on RT, which is interesting. And he's long been a critic of the U.S. war on Afghanistan. If you remember, the U.S. pulled back its aid to Pakistan earlier this year. So I think that shift is actually something that's more significant than we may realize.
Yes, and it certainly would be a shift because, in the first part of this current administration was send more troops, and actually he has added troops. I think we had them down to about 10,000. Nobody knows the exact number, because I saw some estimates could be 15,000, and just calling up the government and asking us for accurate figures, I don't think you can depend on that, because sometimes they don't count special forces and CIA agents and all the things that we do as a military presence. And of course, that's what we do in many countries that we don't even claim we have a presence. So I think there's at least 15,000 there. The numbers probably are significant in the sense that you might need 20, 30, 40, 50,000 to resume full-fledged war. But I think it looks like they're giving up on this whole idea that we're going to conquer that land and turn it into a Western-type democracy. That whole thing was totally foolish, and they're starting to recognize this. But the biggest concern I have is figuring out what policy is. Can you figure out policy from the rhetoric? And we're hearing rhetoric here, and this is good, but is that the policy? Because just like I mentioned in the opening, policies shift rather quickly. Something else might happen the next day. Maybe they'll work towards, increasing the bombing for all we know. But I think the message ought to get out. The administration ought to be encouraged, but the neocons, I imagine, will voice their opinion about this as well.
It'd be nice to have some pro-American people closer to Trump rather than the neocons, because they could frame it this way. They could say, hey, Mr. President, just call this Obama's dumb war, and you'll be the big peacemaker getting us out of it and saving Americans money.
Right.
They probably would frame it right. But, the report we were referring to was by the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction. And it was released on July 25th, so just a few days ago. And it was response to a request last year from 3 members of Congress, one of them being our good friend Walter Jones, to try to figure out how much money we're wasting in Afghanistan. And the Special Inspector General himself said, we only started in 2008 looking at the money that's spent. So 2008 until now, we've easily found $15.5 billion. But that's probably just the tip of the iceberg. And this isn't like money to pay for the whole war. This is just wasted money. For example, one of the things, a 145-mile section of a highway was supposed to be built. After 15 years, only 14% of that is finished. Or after 12 years, only 14% of that's finished. From 14 to 17, there was no progress at all on the highway. So it's this money, is going to big American contractors, up in smoke. It's going to the local warlords, up in smoke. Totally wasted money.
But who knows? What about that $7.8 billion that's going to fight the war on drugs? I mean, that's important. It's the Americans that use too many drugs, and we encourage it. But it's also, I believe, the CIA sort of gets involved in the drug trade once in a while. I just wonder how much it was $7.3 billion. Well, how much of that actually went into the hands of the CIA? Maybe that's a CIA appropriation, because they haven't been very successful in stopping the drug trade.
Now you're sounding like a conspiracy theorist. But the funny thing is, and this is something that's very obvious under the Taliban, whatever their other weaknesses were, there was no drug trade. It only happened after we put our guys in, and then boom, you had a huge mushrooming of the opium trade. Now we say we got a big opioid crisis. So we spend $7.3 billion, and there's more than ever. So you subsidize something, you get more of it, I guess.
Right. But One policy that I've criticized for many, many years is that we get involved, we go in to save a country, and we drop a lot of bombs, we destroy the infrastructure. Iraq is an example, in Afghanistan. We go in and do a lot of destruction. But then there's people who use the moral argument, and you have to at least listen to them. They say, we're responsible. We did this. We destroyed their country. Don't we have a moral responsibility to go in there and repair it? And then they go in and they repair it, and you've already pointed where does the money go? So I've taken the position that the more stealing money from the American people to repair the damage done by the others is not a good position to hold, because if it was a failed policy to begin with, the bailing out and the rebuilding, it doesn't work either. It's sort of this humanitarian foreign aid, outside of a situation like in the Middle East. You say, well, let's send some money in. There's this war going on in Central Africa, and we have to help the people. They're starving, and there's genocide. But you send the money, you send the food in, and guess what? It gets in the hands of the warlords, and they become weapons. So it really never gets in the right hands. That's why outside interference is the real problem. That's why subtly over the years, as I've understood the Taliban as being different from the Al Qaeda, they at least had the moral high ground. What we want is just get the foreigners out, and that is what the Afghans have done for centuries. We don't want foreigners telling us how to live. We like to have tribal living. We like to live in family quarters, and it's worked before. And we don't. I think we need somebody from New York City and Washington D.C. to tell us our social organizations here. So, but the Taliban has a proper position, whether we like what they do, and are we going to judge their religion, or are we going to judge their social practices. I don't think we should even try. But at least they take a position that, we have to send more suicide bombers to New York City and Washington, D.C. They haven't done that.
Yeah, exactly. And the back to the issue of moral responsibility, because it is a tricky one. In a perfect world and under a representative government, there is some sort of strange moral responsibility. But as you point out, even if in a perfect world that money would not be spent right, maybe there should be a little box on your IRS form where if you like these wars overseas, you can check it and you can add another 15 or 20 or 30% onto your tax bill, and then you have a pre-made fund to fix these countries.
I would like to put another one at the bottom of our tax return is, if you're unhappy with the way the government spends your taxes, click here. And if you say you don't like it, you don't have to pay.
Get it all
that
back.
would end this system pretty fast, because I don't too many people would say, oh yeah, we're pretty happy with the way they spend the money, and it's taxes that bring about civilization. You can't have civilization without taxation. and I think the opposite is the case.
We both read an interesting piece again on the Moon of Alabama website, and they talked a lot about this meeting that they had in Qatar. But he points out, and it's, I think, a very good point, what happened in Afghanistan is that the longer the U.S. fought, the less popular they were, the more the local people turned against them. Yeah. They were culturally totally insensitive. The money for rebuilding went to defense contractors in the U.S. and the local warlords there. And it's not just this guy at Moon of Alabama writing it. Actually, we have a quote up here, which I think is a fantastic quote. It's from their site. And this is our own Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, John Sopko. He made this point recently to Voice of America. We keep referring to Pakistan as being the key problem, but the problem is also that the Afghan government at times was viewed very negatively by the local people. And what you really need is to insert a government that the people support, a government that's not predatory, a government that's not a bunch of lawless warlords. He went on to say U.S. policy of pouring billions of dollars into these unstable environments contributed to the problem of creating more warlords and powerful people who took the law in their hands. Finally, he said, in essence, the government we introduced, particularly some of the Afghan local police forces, which were nothing other than warlord militias with some uniforms on, were just as bad as the terrorists before him.
We report this as being important. It's factual and supports our position. But isn't it a shame that this is news? Why wouldn't this be very logical? Why wouldn't they have known that a long time ago? But they failed to say, Well, what if somebody was occupying our territory and telling us how to live? Don't you think we would have the same reaction? The longer they would be here, the more we would dislike them.
Resist,
yeah. But anyway, it's good that we had an investigator that went in there and told the truth about it and verifies what is very logical, and we've been trying to tell them all along, but hopefully a lot of people will be aware of this. But that, of course, is our job, is to try to get that message out and let people know about what's really going on and why we're keeping our fingers crossed that maybe we've taken a teeny step in the right direction in Afghanistan.
Exactly. Let's hope President Trump, listen, just blame it on Obama, blame it on Bush. You're the peacemaker. You're the guy sitting down at the table with everyone. Start pulling troops out, call the war over, let these people run their own countries. One last reminder, you have until midnight tonight to get your early bird tickets for the Ron Paul Institute's August 18th conference in Washington, D.C. There'll still be a few tickets left after that, but the early bird is over tonight at midnight, July 31st at midnight. ronpaulinstitute.org/conference. You can go there to get more info and get your tickets.
Very good. I want to thank the viewers for tuning in today. But once again, I would like to emphasize the importance of us thinking about this policy of intervention and why it always backfired. And there's no reason in the world why we can't change this. This has been at least what we pretended to believe in all along. And we are soon running out of money, and as soon as we run out of money, we won't be able to do it anyway. So the sooner the better. But I think this emphasis is very important, that there are now people talking about it, and let's just hope that Trump comes around and sticks to it and continues to move in this direction. But once again, we recognize that some of his advisors aren't exactly the individuals who have prompted him to promote these policies. So let's keep an eye on this and hope that more Americans will make sure they send the message to Washington that non-intervention is a good position in foreign policy, just as non-intervention is good when it comes to our own lives and our own economy. And the less intervention by government in the affairs of the people, the better off we will be and the better chance there will be for peace and prosperity. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.